Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are hacking into the very concept of communication itself. We're really challenging this idea that meaning lives only inside your head.
Exactly. We're going to do that by taking a shortcut through some pretty advanced theories of cognition, all by diving into one essay that analyzes these foundational works of autistic self-advocacy.
And our source material for this is Sarinah O'Donoghue's essay, Thinking with Sticks. It's a really powerful piece.
It is. It uses two major cultural touchstones: Mel Bag's video, In My Language, and then Adam Wolfond and Estée Klar's work, Space, to argue something, pretty radical.
Which is that narrative is co-authored not just by language, but by our bodies, by objects, movement, and our whole sensory life.
Right.
So the mission for you, our listener, is simple but pretty profound. We want you to leave this deep dive with a more sophisticated, almost nonverbal understanding of how meaning gets assembled.
We want to show you why a story is never only a verbal thing and how our senses are building coherence, long before the words even show up.
We're basically dissolving the myth of the isolated thinking mind.
It's a fundamental reorientation, really. If we accept that a person's story is this arrangement of material elements, a stick, a hum, a water tap, we have to completely rethink who gets to be an author.
And what we even count as cognition.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We should start with the most tangible and maybe the most surprising part of this theory, the thinking object. The author of the essay gives a really specific personal example of this.
Yeah, and this is a crucial starting point because it immediately grounds these huge theoretical claims in something you can actually touch. We're talking about a smooth river stone.
Right. So the author keeps the stone on their desk. It's described as being the color of weathered bone, worn smooth by water and time.
And it's kept there without ceremony. That's a key phrase. It's not some ritual object, not a symbol.
It just is. And when the author's mind starts to, fray a bit or their thoughts scatter, their hand just finds the surface of this stone.
And here's the core of the argument. The world gathers itself into coherence again through the weight and the coolness of that stone.
The author is so clear about this. This object isn't a metaphor for stability. It is a device of orientation. They are thinking with it, not just holding it while they think. But I have to push back a little here because this is where some listeners might get hung up. I mean, couldn't a critic just dismiss this as a kind of sophisticated fidget toy or maybe just a grounding technique?
That's the obvious critique, but O'Donoghue is really insistent that this is cognition.
And why is that?
Because the framework here is distributed cognition. A fidget might help you relieve anxiety, sure, but a thinking object participates in structuring the thought itself.
So it's active, not passive.
Exactly. The stone stabilizes the author's nervous system, which in turn organizes their attention, and that allows the rhythm of the sentences to form before the words are even typed.
Wow. So the stone is materially part of the author's narrative body. It's a literal co-author.
Precisely. The stability of the thought is housed in part in the object itself. It's not a transfer of thought. It's a sharing of the cognitive load.
So with that in mind, autistic narrative is never just a pure transcript of what's going on inside someone's head.
Never. It's an arrangement and assemblage of the body, the object, the movement, the texture. All of them are necessary for making meaning.
And if that boundary dissolves, if thought is really distributed across sticks and stones, then we immediately walk into this massive political arena.
Oh, it absolutely becomes political. The moment we stop pretending language is housed only inside one single fluent individual mind, the whole question of communication supports changes entirely.
Right. We have to recognize that meaning lives in the spaces between us.
In the water taps, in the hum of a stem, and the stick. And accepting the world as a co-author means we have to reconsider the very definition of competence.
Which brings us perfectly to Mel Bag's. Their work, in my language, made this distributed reality visible to millions.
Yes. That video is described as a quiet tectonic plate under the autistic self-advocacy movement, and for very good reason.
It insists that a story is never, ever just verbal.
Bag's work is just a masterclass in exposing the bias of fluency. The video has this architecture, these two distinct movements or dialects, and they're designed to confront you, the viewer, with your own failure to interpret.
Let's walk through that first part, the native language. It's wordless, but it is definitely not silent.
Not at all. Bag's low, steady humming is constant. Their hands are tracing the edges of furniture, flickering across a keyboard.
And crucially, they're skimming and playing with water running from a tap.
And that's where the materiality just shines. In this first movement, Bags is in a continuous dialogue with her environment. Every single action, the tracing of the wood grain, the hum, the feel of the water, each one is a stanza.
Right. It is the communication.
But in the dominant neuronormative frame, we are conditioned to only look for meaning in spoken words. Everything else, stimming, touching, sensory stuff, it's all just categorized as noise, as meaningless.
As a barrier to communication, not the communication itself. And then you get this really abrupt shift.
The translation, the video cuts, and the second movement begins with that synthetic text-to-speech voice.
And Baggs calmly asserts that what you just watched, the hums, the water, the touch, that was their native language.
And it forces this reckoning. If you dismissed all those sensory actions as irrelevant, you're forced to confront your own lack of a framework for understanding what was happening.
It demands you recognize that meaning was there the whole time.
So this connects to something called Gestalt language processing. You mentioned autistic minds often move pattern first. How does that show up in the video?
Well, if we think of language as being built linearly, word by word, that's an analytic model. Gestalt language processing, or GLP, is different. The mind first captures meaning as whole chunks, or a feeling, or an atmosphere.
The Gestalt, the whole picture before the details. Exactly. Like a mood or a melody that carries a complete meaning package. Baggs' sensory sequences operate on that exact logic. The rhythm of the humming, the pattern of the water movement. They establish a coherence that is immediately meaningful, even without dictionary words.
Which makes those sensory elements even more important. The objects aren't just things to play with.
Absolutely not. Think about the detail where Baggs holds a book up close, pressing it to their face, inhaling its scent. The book isn't a symbol waiting to be read.
It's participating.
It's participating in the moment by altering the field of sensation with its scent, its weight. It has its own narrative carried in its texture. Nothing is still. Everything interacts.
That's such a powerful foundation. So if Baggs established the sensory world as its own language, Adam Wolfond's work, Space, takes that idea and uses it to show how he thinks.
Exactly. Wolfond's work really benefits from the ground that Baggs broke. He could move past just having to prove his capacity for language and instead focus on the form of his thinking. He's showing us his cognitive processes in motion.
And the most iconic image from his work is, of course, the stick. You see Wolfond holding it, tapping it, moving it with these intentional, repeated actions.
And his quote is just so clear. I want to think with sticks. He is literally claiming the stick as a thinking partner.
O'Donoghue's analysis says this isn't just symbolic movement. This movement is cognition.
Yes. The stick is doing critical work. It's an externalized working memory, and more specifically, a proprioceptive anchor.
Okay, let's slow down on that term, proprioceptive anchor. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Think of proprioception as your body's internal GPS. It's the sense that tells you where you are in space, how much tension is in your muscles if you're upright. For many people, especially autistic people, processing all that input can destabilize your attention.
So the stick?
The stick, by offering a constant, predictable point of rhythmic pressure or tapping, becomes an anchor. It stabilizes the nervous system, which then allows the mind to focus and communicate. Without that external support, the thought might just stay fragmented.
So the stimming, the tapping, the movement, it's not a discharge of excess energy. It's co-regulation with the environment.
Absolutely. It's establishing the rhythm needed to sustain thought. The act of stimming is, in this frame, a legitimate epistemology. It's a practice of thinking and knowing.
And this is where we see the clash with institutional practices becoming so urgent.
It's a political clash of cognitive styles. Institutions, schools, therapy centers, they demand stillness. They ban fidgets, suppress stims, and demand conformity to this very narrow analytic definition of learning.
They mistake quiet, still bodies for engaged, fluent minds.
Exactly. And Wolfond's work shows that when you try to extinguish the stim, you are suppressing the very action that allows that person's specific way of thinking to flourish.
So the stick and the riverstone become political symbols just because they challenge the idea that only the silent, solitary mind can think.
Precisely. Which brings us to the broader theoretical framework O'Donoghue uses to pull all this together.
The neurodiversity paradigm, posthumanism, and new materialism. This is where we zoom out and see the whole ecology of thought.
Right. The neurodiversity paradigm provides the ethical baseline. Neurological variation is normal and valuable. Posthumanism and new materialism give us the philosophical tools to explain why movement and objects matter.
And the key shift is moving away from that old Renaissance view of the human, the rational, self-contained, autonomous subject.
Yes. So instead of agency being sealed inside a single mind, it is, like we said, distributed. It's diffuse and shared across bodies, objects, textures, and technologies.
It makes me think of a jazz quartet. The music isn't just in the drummer's head, right?
That's a perfect analogy.
Uh,
The music lives between the musicians, in the shared space, in the instruments. If you take away the bass player's instrument, you haven't just removed a tool, you've destroyed a part of the collective mind that creates the music.
And the same applies to the stick or the stone, which reframes narrative from story as text to story as ecology.
Exactly. And this ecological framework has intense implications for highly policed communication supports, like AAC and facilitated communication, or FC.
It reframes them entirely. They're not crutches or suspicious props.
They're relational technologies. They're necessary for the performance of thought. If cognition is distributed, then a facilitator's touch is just scaffolding. It's a steadying hand, a rhythmic pressure that brings a motor system into alignment.
Just like the coolness of the river stone.
Just like the stone.
But FC specifically is so intensely attacked, it's banned in many places. If the theory validates it, why is the institutional policing so aggressive?
Because FTC exposes the lie of the autonomous individual. It makes interdependence visible, undeniable, and that directly threatens a cultural order built on the fantasy of solitary competence.
And we can use the power, threat, meaning, and response framework to dissect this conflict.
Yes. The power dynamic is the institutional insistence that communication has to be solitary and fluent to count. It creates a hierarchy. Independent speaker, good. Dependent speaker, suspicious.
The threat, then, is the fear that if we recognize shared authorship, if we see relational touch as valid, that whole hierarchy of competence and incompetence just collapses.
And then who is the author? The institution fears losing that authority. So the institutional response is to create policies that suppress these relational forms of communication.
Like demanding someone perform independently under surveillance, separated from their supports.
It's institutional cruelty disguised as vigilance. They guarantee failure by demanding that a person prove their humanity under hostile, solitary conditions. The reaction isn't about the communication. It's about maintaining the fantasy of independence.
The moment we accept that we're all entangled with our environment, that the world is thinking with us, the whole basis for assessment has to change.
It has to. Autistic life just exposes the scaffolding the culture tries desperately to hide for everyone.
So let's move from theory to practice. What does recognizing distributed narrative actually mean for educators, clinicians, and autistic people moving through the world?
It demands a complete transformation of posture. For educators, you have to treat stimming not as a behavioral side note to be extinguished, but as core communication.
The rhythmic tap, the hand flutter.
Those are the child organizing their world, telling you their current state of attention. They're narrative lines that have to be respected.
And we have to treat those object relationships, the keys, the beads, a favorite pencil, as thinking companions, not as contraband or simple fidgets.
And assessment has to change completely. If narrative exists in movement and pattern, we need tools that can honor intelligence expressed in gesture, in sequence, in touch. We have to abandon the demand for isolated, solitary performance.
When we legitimize relational authorship, we stop forcing people to fail to prove their humanity.
Yes.
Now, O'Donoghue's essay brings all this together so beautifully, but we should also talk about the limits and gaps that the source material points out.
That's crucial. The essay focuses heavily on meaning and form, what we'd call epistemic concerns, but it often neglects the stark material conditions of survival. It barely names institutional violence, poverty, or the intense politics of who gets believed, especially when using AAC or FC.
Which can lead to a denial of services, real vulnerability.
Absolutely. It's a classic academic gap, broadening the theory without grounding it in resource distribution. The theoretical widening has to anchor itself in policy and access.
And there's a visibility gap, too, right? The source critiques the essay for claiming Baggs and Wolfond were the only works of this type.
Yes, which is an academic claim that shows what peer review sanctions. But it ignores the vast, living archive of multimodal autistic narrative that exists outside the university.
You mean in digital spaces where people are actively doing this every day?
Exactly. The zines, the TikTok stims, the fan edits that weave sound and gesture into these incredibly intricate, emotionally complex maps, these are living practices of distributed narrative. To ignore them is a failure to acknowledge a thriving cultural authority.
So the invitation we're left with is to take this powerful theoretical widening and apply it at the classroom and policy level.
And to ask, who gets to tell a story? And who gets punished when language becomes the gatekeeper of their worth?
We have to reconfigure the environment, not just try to fix the individual.
That's the essential takeaway. If we take Baggs, Wolfond and O'Donoghue seriously? The story of autistic life narratives was never just about diagnosis or confession. They are these sophisticated, high-level experiments in what it means to exist among other lively, thinking matter.
They expose the cultural lie of the isolated subject. They show that subjectivity has always been relational, always distributed, and profoundly material.
We are constantly entangled with the world, and the world is always shaping our story in return.
And here's the final thought we want to leave you with, connecting all the way back to that simple riverstone we started with. The world is thinking with us. We are never as alone as the culture imagines. As you finish this deep dive, maybe consider something right next to you, your mug, your keys, the pattern on your keyboard, the rhythm of your foot tapping, and ask yourself whether it is revealing itself as one of your own thinking objects, already holding you in place and telling a story right alongside you.